I am Joe Kowalski. My passage comes from Dickens' The Pickwick Papers, chapter 30. In this passage, the Pickwickians decide to go ice skating, a hobby of which poor Mr. Winkle is not altogether good at. "Now," said Wardle, after a substantial lunch, with the agreeable items of strong beer and cherry brandy, had been done ample justice to, "what say you to an hour on the ice? We shall have plenty of time." "Capital," said Mr. Benjamin Allen. "Prime," ejaculated Mr. Bob Sawyer. "You skate, of course, Winkle?" said Wardle. Yes, replied Mr. Winkle. I am rather out of practice." "Oh, do skate, Mr. Winkle," said Arabella. "I like to see it so much." "Oh, it is so graceful," said another young lady. A third young lady said it was elegant, and a fourth expressed her opinion that it was swan-like. "I should be very happy, I'm sure," said Mr. Winkle, reddening, "but I have no skates." This objection was at once overruled. Trundle had a couple of pair, and the fat boy announced that there were half a dozen more downstairs, whereat Mr. Winkle expressed exquisite delight and looked exquisitely uncomfortable. Old Wardle led the way to a pretty large sheet of ice where the snow had been swept away during the night. Mr. Winkle, with his face and hands blue in the cold, had been forcing a gimlet into the soles of his feet, and putting his skates on with the points behind, and getting the straps in very complicated and entangled state, with the assistance of Mr. Snodgrass, who knew rather less about skates than a Hindu. At length, however, with the assistance of Mr. Weller, the unfortunate skates were firmly screwed and buckled on, and Mr. Winkle was raised to his feet. "Now then, sir," said Sam in an encouraging tone, "off with you, and show 'em how to do it." "Stop, Sam, stop!" said Mr. Winkle, trembling violently and clutching hold of Sam's arms with the grasp of a drowning man. "How slippery it is, Sam!" "Not an uncommon thing upon the ice, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "Hold up, sir." This last observation of Mr. Weller's bore reference to a demonstration Mr. Winkle made at that instant of a frantic desire to throw his feet in the air and dash the back of his head on the ice. These are very awkward skates, ain't they, Sam?" inquired Mr. Winkle, staggering. "I'm afeard there's an awkward gentleman in 'em, sir," replied Sam. "Now, Winkle," cried Mr. Pickwick, quite unconscious that there was anything the matter. "Come, the ladies are all anxiety." Yes, replied Mr. Winkle with a ghastly smile. "I'm coming." "Just a-going to begin," said Sam, endeavouring to disengage himself. "Now, sir, start off." "Just hold me at first, Sam, will you?" said Mr. Winkle. There, that's right. I shall soon get in the way of it, Sam. Not too fast, Sam, not too fast." Mr. Winkle, stooping forward with his body half doubled up, was being assisted over the ice by Mr. Weller in a very singular and unswan-like manner, when Mr. Pickwick most innocently shouted from the opposite bank, "Sam! Sir! Here, I want you." "Let go, sir," said Sam. "Don't you hear the governor calling? Let go, sir." With a violent effort, Mr. Weller disengaged himself from the grasp of the agonized Pickwickian, and, in doing so, admitted a considerable impetus to the unhappy Mr. Winkle. With an accuracy which no degree of dexterity or practice could have ensured, that unfortunate gentleman bore swiftly down into the centre of the reel, at the very moment when Mr. Bob Sawyer was performing a flourish of unparalleled beauty. Mr. Winkle struck wildly against him, and with a loud crash they both fell heavily down. Mr. Pickwick ran to the spot. Bob Sawyer had risen to his feet, but Mr. Winkle was far too wise to do anything of the kind in skates. He was seated upon the ice, making spasmodic efforts to smile, but anguish was depicted on every lineament of his countenance. "Are you hurt?" inquired Mr. Benjamin Allen, with great anxiety. "Not much," said Mr. Winkle, rubbing his back very hard. Mr. Pickwick was excited and indignant. He beckoned to Mr. Weller and said in a stern voice, "Take his skates off." "No, but really, I had scarcely begun," remonstrated Mr. Winkle. "Take his skates off," repeated Mr. Pickwick firmly. The command was not to be resisted. Mr. Winkle allowed Sam to obey it in silence. "Lift him up," said Mr. Pickwick. Sam assisted him to rise. Mr. Pickwick retired a few paces apart from the bystanders, and beckoning his friend to approach, fixed a searching look upon him, and uttered in a low but distinct and empathetic tone these remarkable words. "You're a humbug, sir." "A what?" said Mr. Winkle, starting. "A humbug, sir. I will speak plainer if you wish it. An impostor, sir." With these words Mr. Pickwick turned slowly upon his heel and rejoined his friends.